Bus luck. When we left Holt, Montana, the bus had somehow overbooked, and the driver sheepishly asked if anyone would be willing to stand through the night. There was nothing sheepish about it for me. I said I would, as if I had been waiting my whole life for someone to ask me to stand through the American night while people slept softly all around me. It seemed fair. The driver drove, the passengers slept, and I wondered and marveled and dreamed. Everybody was doing their job. I was 18 years old, and sometimes my job seemed to keep me on the outskirts of whatever was happening. And this was a kind of outskirts too, but it was my kind of outskirts. If you were going to stand on a bus through Montana, there was no better way than with people sleeping all around you. I felt like there should be a word for when it looked like you were on the outskirts of something, but what you felt was the opposite of that. If a guy had any hope of making some kind of poetry out of a bus ride across America, then he sure as hell better be the one to volunteer to stand. I felt like the stars were looking down thinking, okay, somebody's going to give it a shot. It seemed to me like the only thing to give. We had taken the bus from Seattle to Madison together, me and Drew. He was quitting school for a while, so he'd stayed in Madison, and I was coming back by myself. The ride there was mostly laughter, and the ride back was mostly sorrow, but the elevated sorrow of looking out the window and having no place but my heart to let it all in. I didn't know there was an elevation where it didn't feel like sorrow anymore until I stood through the night. This is me, I thought. I hadn't known it myself, but that was the clearest I had ever seen myself. I saw myself more clearly than even the ride to Madison with Drew, when we'd made comedy out of anything, an elevated comedy that wasn't laughing at anybody any more than we laughed at ourselves. I had thought that that was the truth of who I was, but in that Montana night, I felt like the truth was an alone thing. Even though Drew would have liked to stand through the night too, he would have wondered and marveled and dreamed like me. But the peace that I made with humanity that night was a private peace. Drew believed in that peace, and he sought it too, but if he had been standing there with me, it would have been very easy to reach for comedy. The comedy was there. It was funny to watch people sleep, but it was a lot of other things too. I couldn't even begin to name all of them, but standing there by myself, I didn't have to. And that was the kind of friendship Drew and I had too. We told each other a lot, but we gave each other room to not speak the unspeakable. We might have even given each other that room standing on the bus through the night, but by myself, it was effortless. I felt like a kid. I wanted myself to remember for the rest of my life that whatever happened in the world, somebody might be standing on a Greyhound bus while everyone around them slept. I wanted myself to remember it when I was back in college. I thought it would help me to make some sense of college. I didn't know how. Maybe it was to look at people there, students, professors, receptionists, managing advising offices, and to remember that they all could be bus sleepers while somebody stood through the night. I knew that I wanted to volunteer for that job when I was actually on a bus, and I wanted to do it all the time too. There were a great many people who I wanted to stand while they slept. I couldn't think of anybody who I wouldn't do that for. Dormitories and fraternities and sororities and lecture halls, and past the campus out into the city. I knew it was impossible to really remember it. People weren't asleep for one thing, and once they were awake, you had to be ready for anything. I didn't know if it was possible to remember it as anything other than an isolated event. Maybe a good story to tell, but the story really didn't do justice to the lesson underneath it. There was something in that night to take with me, but I didn't know what. Even if I knew, I didn't think it could be any match for the waking world. This was the whole world we're talking about, after all. Your days couldn't be spent in expectation of wakeful nights. Still, I'd stood up and volunteered, knowing that there was something I wanted to see from that position. And I'd seen it, so what I could take with me was the knowledge that I was already right about something. Suddenly, I couldn't wait to get back home and find out what else I was already right about. If that was all I had to take with me, that was plenty.